Baseball Hall of Famer Jayson Stark here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Jayson? How does that sound? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that great?
Good. I feel like I've been floating, man, for about a week. It's pretty unbelievable.
No, it's funny. You're well. It's not funny. It's great. It's terrific. But when I say funny, it's like it's remarkable. Is the better word. Your piece in which your first person piece behind the scenes in Cooperstown on Induction weekend. Clearly. The honor is different when you go into the Hall of Fame from covering it. And covering it is just an incredible honor. When I did that at ESPN and your piece talking about the beautiful Otesaga Hotel in Cooperstown, it really is straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. And they have an event there where all the returning Hall of Famers show up. I walked in there, and it was like Night at the Museum. All the plaques were alive. I couldn't speak. I'm wondering, and you talk about that in your piece. I want to give you the floor and tell people what that was like the day before everything went down.
Yeah, I mean, that's really exactly the way I felt. These guys treated me from day one like I was one of them. Wade Boggs walked up to me on Thursday and welcomed me to the club, and, I heard those words a lot. But then it was Saturday. We were supposed to assemble in a room at the Otesaga so I could go speak. So naturally, I was the first one there. I wasn't going to be late for my own speech.
Right, yes.
And so, I was just sitting around, chatting, trying my best to keep my heart from exploding from my chest. And then I looked around the room and realized who was in the room. Sandy Koufax was in the room, and Brooks Robinson was in the room, and Ken Griffey was sitting right next to me. And I have to admit, I had to get up, leave my seat, and walk over to a corner of the room and try to take it all in. And I thought, you know what? I need to take a walk just to breathe. I think I'll walk down the hall of the men's room just to breathe. And so I'm walking, and next thing I know, there's Jeff Bagwell. And he was great to me all weekend. He said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Jeff, I'll be honest, I'm having a hard time feeling like I am worthy of being in that room with those guys." And he said, "I feel the same way." I said, "You feel the same way?" And he said, "Yeah, I have a hard time sometimes convince myself that I'm a Hall of Famer the way they're Hall of Famers." And it made me feel better. Later, we're sitting with Jim Thome on Sunday when they told him that they would like him to sit next to Hank Aaron on stage during that ceremony on Sunday. I saw the look of awe on his face. And so I realized it wasn't just me. Even the greatest players who ever lived have that feeling about guys in that room. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then obviously, the day that it happens and in that meadow, it really is, like I said, a painting. The whole thing is just a beautiful weekend. It's just amazing. And I'm wondering what of the day itself on that Sunday will you remember, Jayson?
Well, Sunday I didn't speak. Right. My day to speak was Saturday.
Yep.
So Sunday, I thought, wait, I'm going to have it easy. All I have to do is go out there and wave. But because I was last, I found myself backstage with just a really small group. Brandy Halladay was there, Edgar was there, Mike Messina, Mariano, and Mike Messina was showing me these notes that his wife had written out for him so he wouldn't make a fool of himself out there, and we were laughing about that. And both he and Mariano were so nice to me, were so complimentary about my speech. And Mariano even said to me, he said, this is easy for you. You write, you play. You write, you talk. It's easy. We don't write, we don't talk, we play. If you had to play, it would be hard for you. And it's hard to argue with that, right? But it almost made me feel like, for a minute, he would love to trade his skill set for my skill set because he wasn't sure he could get the words out. And then, of course, he went out there and he was awesome.
He was
terrific. I'll never forget that moment.
Well, I mean, and you're also a perfect person to put in perspective of what the day was like for the Halladays. You have Philly roots. before you joined ESPN for all those years that I was fortunate enough to work with you. Jayson, what was it? What can you put into words what the day was like for the Halladay family on Sunday?
So beautiful, so sad, so special, so heartbreaking. It was all of that. My wife and I talked a lot to Brandy through the weekend, and she was amazing. She handled herself with incredible dignity, as she always does. She was really emotional on Sunday. How could she not be? But anytime I've ever heard her speak, she somehow finds the right words. And I thought she did again on Sunday, as difficult as that was. I was in the front row. In fact, people thought I was photobombing the Jeter, the Jeter, Posada, Pettit, Tino Martinez group. They were sitting right behind us. But I watched her closely as they were showing the video of Roy and his career, and she couldn't watch. She couldn't make herself watch. And I felt for her so much in that moment. Yet she was able to stand up and be so honest and real about it, and talk about how she couldn't watch. Could someone please send her that video sometime? I thought she was amazing, and her kids, the way they handled everything. Her son Braden was amazing. He wants to do what we do, Rich, and then he actually sat at the podium with her afterwards at the press conference. Their family is still strong and holding it together, and that's not easy.
No, it is not. Jayson Stark, J.G. Taylor Spink Award winner at this past weekend's National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum ceremony right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Do you think Edgar's admission is finally going to break something free for, well, we know Ortiz obviously will do that, but, I mean, the designated hitter sort of bugaboo, letting those folks into the hall? What do you got for me on that now, Jayson?
Yeah, I do. And Harold Baines was a DH for the most part in his career. It was just amazing to go through this decade-long debate about whether a DH belonged in the Hall of Fame, and then have him stand up there and give those speeches back to back. And it's going to take just the right DH. It's going to take someone like Edgar, whose period of dominance just as a hitter is so undeniable that no voter can ignore it. I don't think just any old DH is going to go in, but you're right. He certainly paves the way for Big Papi. And in some ways, I wonder how he's going to affect the next Veterans Committee that considers, say, Dick Allen. Because, one of the things that also hurt Edgar was he got to the big league so late that his traditional counting stats didn't seem like they were enough. And yet we were able to look beyond that as a voting group and realize what he was for those 10 years, all those years in a row of 300, 400 on base and 500 slugging. It just doesn't happen. And, if you look at Dick Allen did not have the counting numbers, but he does have the other numbers. And so I do think Edgar is going to cause us as voters to have a different perspective on a number of candidates going forward.
And what about the so-called steroid era? What's the latest scuttlebutt? I don't know if you had your ear to the ground because your feet were not on it based on your weekend. What can you tell me about it?
Yeah, well, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, 3 elections to go. A couple of years ago, I was convinced they were getting in because of the way their vote totals had grown year to year. And then what we've seen the last 2 elections is they're pretty stagnant. And, it almost feels like anybody who was open to changing their mind and voting for them has already changed it. They're not that far away, but are there enough votes for them? I'm not sure. The ballot has really opened up now because of the number of candidates that we have elected over the last couple of years. We're about to find out, but it really wouldn't shock me if they wind up going in on the final year, which I believe would be Alex Rodriguez's first year.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, right.
How about they get half a plaque, those two? Because you could make the case Clemens, seriously, Clemens had a Hall of Fame career with the Red Sox. and Bonds had a Hall of Fame career with the Pirates. You could make considerable cases for that, Jayson, couldn't you?
Yeah, you totally could. I mean, there are plenty of reasons to vote for those guys if you're open to it. And I've come to this conclusion that what we should do with players like that is we should vote for them, we should elect them, and then we should let the Hall figure out how to handle it. The Hall of Fame has been very happy to stand in the background and let the writers try to figure it out and put all the agonizing on us. Suppose we ever elect them, then they could figure out what's the best way to deal with it.
Now that you're in, Jayson, to heck with it. Leave it on their lap, man. I love it.
Right?
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well,
if I open the floodgates, I don't think I have.
Jayson Stark here on the Rich Eisen Show. Let's talk about the here and now. This is weird. The trade deadline. Let's not ignore. This has been weird, but it's just been weird in the fact that you had Kimbrel signed late. It was weird that Keuchel signed late. That we're seeing weird things about the market and free agency we hadn't seen before. This is now the first deadline where there is no waiver period behind it. Can we draw a through line between everything I've just said, Jayson? Do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it, yeah. And this has really been an odd deadline. People thought that the impact of only having one deadline and no August trades would be that everything would start sooner. But instead, almost nothing of consequence has happened yet. And you've got a really strange structure in most of these divisions where the division leaders have really big leads. And there are very few teams that can look at the division standings other than the NL and AL Central and think, yeah, we're going to catch that team. But then you have this whole group of teams that's 2-3 games out of the wild card, a game and a half out of the wild card. And I think it's creating a weird kind of gridlock in that those teams have a really hard time selling when they're 2 games out of contention, right, or out of a playoff spot. But it's hard to buy when you know your reward for even sneaking in is you've got to win that wild card game, and then you got to try to figure out some way to beat the Dodgers or Yankees. Good luck. And so those teams don't want to buy. They're afraid to sell. Everybody's just in a holding pattern, waiting for some clarity or trying to figure out some way they're going to explain it to their fan base when they finally do what they do.
Well, I mean, the Giants are a perfect example, right? I mean, the Giants were dead in the April, May, and June waters, and now they're on fire. They're above water. They're 2 games above 500. You can make the case that they're the best team in baseball in the month of July. Madison Bumgarner's not going anywhere with Bochy walking eventually to the place where you just got enshrined, right? I mean, there's no chance of him being traded in the next week. Would you categorize that, Jayson?
I wouldn't say no chance, but they were 11 games under 500 entering July, and now they're 2 games over. That is just crazy.
It is.
That happened. And, I think in any normal circumstance, they'd go for it, but just take a step back now, Rich. Why did they hire Farhan Zaidi? That was a team that did everything internally. That was just a picture of stability. They didn't hire Farhan to keep the band together. That was not the plan. I'm sure there's incredible tension within that organization trying to figure out what to do. I wouldn't say never on Mad Bum. It's hard, but I wouldn't say never. I would say that if they trade him, it has to be the kind of deal where Farhan can look into the cameras and say, how could I not do this?
So then which is the team that offers them the Godfather offer, or should? Let's put it that way. Which team do you think needs to make the Godfather offer for Madison Bumgarner?
I mean, for the top of the list is the Braves. I think the Braves need a guy that fits that profile. He'd be really comfortable there. I think they'd have a chance to sign him and make it worth their while if they trade for him. That's the most logical fit for me. But, he's reminded us now during this run who he still is. He might not be the guy who marched out of the pen in Kansas City in 2014 in Game 7, but this guy's an animal, and he competes. And the better your team is, the better he is. And the bigger the game is, the bigger the moment is for him. he loves this. You put him on a good team. I think a lot of teams could dream on that and where it would go, but it's going to have to be a big deal. Big.
Okay, and name me another big name guy that you think could go. Let's say the Yankees or the Red Sox, or say, anybody else at the top of the food chain, even the Cubs, somebody that might Washington making a move here to try and do something.
I still think the guy to watch is Trevor Bauer. I mean, the Indians they're having exactly the same debate that the Giants are. All of a sudden, they're 16 games over. All of a sudden, they're 3 games out in the division. All of a sudden, if the wild card game were today, they would host it. And it's really difficult for a team like that to sell. And yet, I was in Cleveland for the All-Star game, and I get the feeling they know this team, as well as it's played lately, is not as good as their other teams. They're not a win the World Series team, not as currently constituted. If they could make a deal that's the equivalent of what the Rays did last year with Chris Archer, I'm convinced they would do that. A team like the Astros, can they absorb him into their clubhouse? All the drama that's gone on between him and that team, I don't know, but I'd watch them. They're shopping for that kind of guy. It wouldn't shock me if the Padres came out of the pack. I don't think we live in an age now where the trade deadline is all about buyers and sellers the way it once was. I think it's a shopping opportunity. That's how most teams now view it, your modern front offices. And so the Indians are smart and creative. There are a lot of teams out there that could buy Trevor Bauer, knowing you have him next year too. He's a fascinating piece in this puzzle.
Last one for you, Jayson Stark. Based on last night's Twins-Yankees game, even though it's not an all-time situation, it was intense, and the Twins fans and the Yankee fans, you knew that the loser would leave a mark on them. What's the one sporting event in your life that the loss by a team that you were rooting for that you still can't get over to this very day? In any sport.
It's been a long time since I really rooted, but
any sport.
We're a big Syracuse basketball family, and I don't think I've gotten over Keith Smart yet. I have to admit, I can still see the Derek Coleman clanking the free throw and Keith Smart hitting that shot.
Indiana.
That's the one still sticking in my memory bank.
There you go. Well, hey, congrats, Jayson. You are well-deserving of the weekend and the honor that you just had bestowed upon you. I've known you for a while, and I love having you on the show. Congratulations to you and your family.
Rich, thank you so much. I really appreciate those words. I appreciate you having me on. You and I go back a long time, and I treasure our friendship. Thank you.
Right back at you. At JasonST on Twitter. Jayson Stark, National Baseball Hall of Famer. Right here on The Rich Eisen Show.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download The Rich Eisen Show app.